where things end. Oh, we're also recording this session, just to let you know. So what about where we look at endings? What about if we could put some of the energy into looking after the endings of organisations and projects that we do into their startups? How would that help? What would that look like, and how would we do it? I hope those are the kind of questions that you're here to discuss with us today as well. We're recording this session while we have our presentation, so I'm delighted to be joined by Iona and Linda from the Decelerator, who are going to tell you a bit about what they do and the support that they offer. We're going to record that part of the session, but we'll turn the recording off when we get to the Q&A so that you can feel free to speak slightly more confidentially. Please do introduce yourself in the chat, say hello, let us know where you're from, what kind of things that you might be looking for from this session today. You can stick questions in the chat. Any questions that are shared in the chat will be shared with everyone. Private messages aren't, but maybe you might also think about contacting us afterwards if you've got a specific situation to talk about as well. And with that, I think we're mainly nearly here. So I'm going to hand you over to Iona first to tell you a bit more about the Decelerator. Thanks, Iona.
Thanks, Rachel. And thank you to the whole of SCVO for pulling this little group together. And Tracy, who's not here, has done a lot of the heavy lifting. So thanks to her. It's lovely to be with you all. My name is Iona, and I am part of the small founding team behind this new organisation or project called the Decelerator. And what I hope you'll hear today is a different and hopefully slightly more hopeful and inspiring account of what we think endings can do as part of all of the different parts of organisational life cycles in civil society. I think all too often we come at these conversations about this particular point in an organisation's life cycle, whether it's the end of a programme or perhaps a chief exec's kind of tenure or a founder's tenure, or even the closure or merger of an organization itself, with quite a lot of trepidation. And we completely understand that. I understand that. I came to this work because I used to run the Joe Cox Foundation in memory of the MP. And one of the things we did with that organization at the time I ran it was create a kind of spend out. So we were thinking about just existing for 5 years. So I have personal experience of what comes with the kind of fear and the kind of hesitation around this topic. But as you're hopefully going to hear from us now, we think that done with enough time and enough intention and enough, crucially, funding, we think endings can be really powerful and impactful for communities, for people, for the projects we really care about. So I'm just going to share my screen with you all so that I can whiz you through some slides. So what you're going to hear from us, and we are myself, Iona, and Linda, who's in the chat, and she'll introduce herself in a second. We're two of about a very small part-time 5-member team, each of us working just small portions of our week on this. And yeah, we're here to tell you a bit about what the Decelerator is and how we, along with SCVO and all sorts of others, are here to help and support organisations like you to think about these things. But we're also going to tell you a bit about what we're noticing. I think one of the things that we think is interesting and important about paying attention to kind of what's coming to an end or what's closing is it reveals to us some of the things that are going well and some of the challenges civil society organisations are facing. And because we don't really look at this bit of the organisational life cycle, all too often we miss these quite rich things. So we're going to share a bit about what we're seeing and noticing with you, because it might help you make sense of something that you're experiencing if you're a trustee or a kind of staff member in an organisation. And then there's plenty of time for discussion. So in a nutshell, we are in an experimental phase. We've just got 18 months of funding, and the funding is from Paul Hamlin Foundation, Esme Fairbairn Foundation, and the Pears Foundation. And we're exploring whether there is a support service that can be made available for civil society organisations. And we are offering information, tools, and hands-on support for better endings. And by endings, we mean closures, mergers, CEO transitions, programming endings, and all sorts of endings just as part of the everyday life cycle of organisations. And we see better endings as those which place an organization's purpose at the heart of decision making. So we can, all find ourselves sometimes contemplating what would it take to keep this organization alive. And that's important because we know that people's jobs and people's livelihoods and the passions we have for the issues that we exist to work on are important. But those things can't be conflated with the organization itself. Those things will exist outside of the organization. And so we believe that better endings are those that really root itself in like the mission and the purpose of the organization, not just the nuts and bolts and the four walls of its material structure. We think better endings are those that treat all the people involved or affected with respect. And it's really hard. Sometimes redundancy processes or the reduction of services and the impact on beneficiaries can really hold us back from taking very difficult decisions. We're not here to say that stuff is easy, but we are here to say that with enough time and funding, those really terribly difficult things can be done better and worse, depending on how well you plan for them. And so we think better endings are those that treat all people involved with as much respect as is possible. And we're all about legacy, whether we choose it or not. Like an organization that might come to a close, a program or project might come to an end, a founder might step away. Whether we intend it or not, there'll be a legacy. We leave behind things that will continue or not. And we think that taking enough time and applying some funding where it's possible can create a really lasting legacy. Lessons can be learned. People can choose to take things forward, but also what needs to be left behind by the end of this thing. What can we use this opportunity to do to leave behind and say, well, actually, this doesn't need to be taken on into a new chapter. And I probably don't need to tell you, as civil society experts yourselves, that often organizations don't have the time, money, or headspace to do any of those things, because we, for very good and understandable reasons, find ourselves losing decades of expertise overnight. We can place unnecessary and unfair emotional burdens on ourselves and on other people. And that we crucially miss opportunities to do that kind of sifting. What needs to be taken forward? What needs to be left behind? And instead, things just get replicated or carried forward without really thinking about it. And the reason we're called the decelerator is we're trying to play a bit here on the idea of an accelerator, which you might know is a kind of classic thing that civil society uses, but originated in Silicon Valley, where people are like, the right ideas and the right people can come together with the right money and things can grow and grow and grow. And we're like, but what would it look like to apply that in reverse, to say that yes, there are times for growth and expansion and even sustaining, but there might also be times where we need to consider what a contraction or a reduction might look like. And how do we do that with as much energy and ambition and focus on impact at the other end of the cycle? So that's why we're called the decelerator. This is something that my colleague Linda pulled out from the SCVO Good Governance Guide, which demonstrates really what it is that you can do when you set out to consider or plan for or anticipate an ending in an organization. And I wouldn't probably say this in other events or settings, but there is something really interesting to us about how progressive, I suppose, or far forward thinking we're finding Scottish civil society colleagues and friends on this issue. There are other parts of the country where we might hold an event with an infrastructure organization, and the people who come are like, well, there's no other world for a good ending other than one that's total failure. And yet somehow there's a sensitivity in Scotland, perhaps just with the people we've talking about, I don't know, but there is a sensitivity and a kind of confidence, I suppose, around endings that is demonstrated in some of the really excellent SCVO governance kind of information that's available on the website, as much as you'll get from talking to colleagues on your helplines. Just a quick bit about our theory of change. We are providing and testing ways that we can provide immediate practical and emotional support alongside the likes of SCVO and all sorts of other places that you turn to when you're looking for information and advice. And we're doing that in a way that hopefully tries to build and grow the field of practice. So At the moment, if you want to set something up, you can go and find a freelancer that will help you set it up. But it's very difficult. You don't really know what to Google if you're like, well, I think this organization might close. Who do I need to help? And what we're trying to do is fix some of that by building a network and fields of practice around this stuff. But we're really doing it. My background is as a campaigner, and I know that lots of this stuff is, you know, bound up and stuck with a whole load of things that are outside of our control as trustees or staff or beneficiaries of organizations. And so we've got our sights set on a few like really key kind of barriers and breakthroughs that we might be able to build the evidence base around. So if we can build the evidence base around why endings matter and how better things are possible than just catastrophic insolvency or unplanned wind downs or founders that don't understand how it is that they can hand on an organization for sustainable impact, then we will have the evidence we need to try and influence other people. And we might be thinking about influencing funders and helping them think about what their funder practice might do to either support and kind of lift up the opportunities for endings or suppress them and create this context of fear where people don't go to their funders anywhere near early enough because they're convinced the funders will pull the plug on the funding that they do have, and therefore it will even be more catastrophic. We also have some thoughts about some practices of regulators and some stuff around insolvency law, all sorts of things. We don't have the answers yet, but that's why we're doing this work and experimenting with it. And we hope just on that to be around for 5 to 10 years. We don't think that the world needs more infrastructure organizations. People like SCVO doing that work brilliantly and beautifully. We're here to just try and support and catalyze a bit of a shift about the way that people think about all sorts of endings. And in doing so, if we can support others to take up this work and probably do it better than we could ever imagine doing it, then that's our ambition, rather than creating a like lifelong sustained organization. And just a quick bit about the services we're experimenting with before I hand over to Linda. We know that the end of a leadership role or the closure or merger of a beloved organization can be really daunting. How do you even bring it up with your fellow trustees? Once you have brought it up, what does a responsible conversation look like? What does it mean for me? What does it mean for my staff? Like, what does it mean for all these people that are going to gossip about why this thing might need to end or will end? And so we are designing our work hopefully in a way that's really aware of like some of the sensitivities around this stuff. And so we offer trusted, supportive and non-judgmental support. So whenever you come to us, you can guarantee that we aren't going to say, what on earth have you done? That's a disaster. We're going, A, we've heard pretty much everything there is to be heard. And B, we believe that like the last thing that people in difficult situations or situations where they've got a hunch sometimes, you don't even know that something might need to end, but they just have this gut feeling that like there's a question that needs to be asked. And we are creating spaces where you can ask those questions without judgment, with people who are going to provide both some space to listen and to reflect, some emotional support, and then also where we can provide it, some like practical signposting and some sort of motivating ways in which you might move from where you are to where you might want to find yourself. You can be any kind of nonprofit organization, and that means that whether you're a charity or a KIC or an unaffiliated organization, we don't care who you are. Our funders don't care either, as long as you're a civil society organization. And the things that we are able to offer you at the moment are a hotline where you can, and we'll circulate details about how you access this, but you can access a conversation with a kind of confidential
Do you want to move that meeting up?
Oh, there we are. Sorry about that. Got a little bit distracted. Yeah, the hotline is available for anyone who has a kind of either a hunch that something is going to end. Perhaps you've taken a decision and trustees might have decided that an organization is going to close or a program needs to go. Perhaps you're a chief exec and you're like, I think I might have served my time here, but how do I step away from this in the most responsible way? This is the place to bring those questions. And you're an hour of someone's time, and we will give you all sorts of hopefully supportive, practical and emotionally aware things to help you with your position. The second is the directory. We're developing we have developed a set of tools, and that will keep going, like step-by-step guides to thinking about closure, to bringing up the conversation, to thinking about your own succession, all sorts of things. And then the third thing we're doing is building this network of freelancers, which means that Although our work is entirely free at the point of use, hopefully it will remain that way if we're successful with our funding applications, we can make referrals to other people who may or may not charge fees, consultants, agencies, all sorts of things, but who we know and trust are good at supporting people through organizational endings. So now going to hand you over to Linda, who's been with us for about 5 months now. Don't know where those 5 months have gone. And she is going to first say a bit about all of the amazing things that she's brought to the party, and also a bit about what we're noticing as we zone in on and focus on endings in civil society. Over to you, Linda.
Yeah, do you want to carry on screen sharing? And because it's only a few slides, so great. So I'm Linda Craig, and I have been delighted to be invited to join this by Iona. I've been working in the charity sector for something like 30 years, but the last 10 or so I've been an interim manager doing senior roles, some mostly covering maternity leave, but also doing some change management, and sometimes going in where it's not supposed to be change management, but it turns out that something is ending and we need to do that well. And particularly I've been involved in mergers and indeed endings of programs. So that's why I'm interested in this. I do think that we can do it better, but we don't really think about it. And I suppose one of the things I've noticed is it's a kind of microcosm of how we think about death as well. We're not very good at talking about death in this country, and I'm wondering if that's part of why we're not really good at talking about endings of anything at all. So that's my thing. So, but generally, what are we noticing? So we've now got a body of work, if you like, in terms of what we're hearing from people. And I suppose that the top one is the key thing. We've tried everything to make this work. We're out of options. Quite often, chief exec or chair will come to us and say, something always comes out of the woodwork. We always get that little bit of funding at the last minute, so we stave off thoughts about, what happens next for another year. This time, we don't think that rabbit is going to come out of a hat. The hat is now empty of rabbits, and therefore we need to start thinking. And the earlier people can start thinking, if an ending is on the table, the better. We'll talk a bit more about what happens if that doesn't happen in a second. It is about finance and it is about business models. There's obviously desperate worries about financing and about where money is coming from. Funders are changing their priorities, local authorities we know about. There's all sorts of financial issues, but that's not only the only issue that we're seeing. And one of the things is about conflict within organizations. And that's kind of tied up with pressures from hybrid and remote working patterns. We've all done brilliantly at coming into a hybrid working pattern. And this is clearly, we came into it very quickly during lockdown, although some organizations were ahead of the game, but all of us have adapted. But what I don't think we've thought about is how that affects our working relationships. And particularly what we're seeing is that trustees are often making decisions and not really knowing enough about each other. They're sort of meeting online. There's no space online to sort of get to know people. And then suddenly, with a bunch of people whom you've only really seen as little squares on a screen, you're expected to make very difficult decisions. And it's not entirely surprising that some of those decisions are not working as well as they could do. And the other thing that we're seeing is leadership succession seems to be harder. That's partly because all the pressures I have just mentioned mean that people are thinking, no, actually, I can't do this anymore. I either can't do this within this organization or I can't do this within the sector. And it's becoming more and more difficult for organizations to recruit people. And then there's pressures of funding, which means that voluntary organizations often can't pay what people could get elsewhere. And there is this general concern that it's just becoming more difficult to be a leader and therefore people are stepping away, and therefore it's more difficult for people to find new people. And fragile governance, that's partly about decisions, but also one of the things we're seeing is that the model itself is creaking. You know, the whole idea of voluntary trustees giving their time and effort. Often that time and effort, particularly around difficult and crisis situation, is more than people can do within the best rest of their life, given that most of them will have jobs and other pressures as well. So the model itself is very difficult. And on top of that, people are looking for new ways of working. They're looking for flatter decision making, more corporate ownership across the whole organization. On all those transitions are difficult and challenging and exciting, and they take time. And if you haven't set out the time to do a major restructuring, whilst at the same time as delivering whatever your core service is or your outputs are, then the whole thing can sort of come crashing down with neither delivery nor change happening in a good way. So that's what we're seeing. Next slide. So what we're trying to do is to, as Iona said, we need to think about providing skilled professionals who can provide hands-on support with endings. It can be very difficult to find within existing budgets, which is why we're arguing that with funders, we're influencing funders to think about how they might free up some money, just as they free up money for growth, that they might free up some money for good endings, because we can find people who can coach chief execs or chairs, people who can run facilitated workshops so that staff are kept on board with changes. There are all sorts of things that are out there, but they need to be funded. But what if emergency unplanned wind downs lead to insolvency? It's dire for everybody, frankly, because we lose instantly a whole load of learning. So the reports or the work that's done, the websites get turned off, everything suddenly disappears. And that's a massive loss to the whole sector. It means that whatever service was being provided, there's a whole loss to the beneficiaries, but there's also a loss to any other organisation that might pick up that sort of work to make sure they're not reinventing the wheel. So this is one of the reasons why we encourage everybody to think earlier rather than later. But the good news on that is that people are coming to us earlier. We're seeing, Iona, when she first started this work, was just seeing people saying, well, we're going insolvent tomorrow, what can you do? And the answer to that is, I'm very much afraid nothing. But what we're now seeing is people coming to us much earlier. Chief execs who are saying, well, I think I want to probably do this for about 3 more years, but what do I think about in terms of who I engage, when I engage, who I talk to. Organizations are saying, okay, we've got a big piece of project funding, but we need to think about what happens when that project funding ends, and rather than just suddenly turning around and thinking, oh, now what do we do? So that's us in a nutshell. Iona, have I missed anything?
No, I don't think so. That's it from us, really. There's obviously so much more we could say. There's so much that we're not noticing. There's so much more nuance to insolvency. Can be good if you're trading away towards insolvency right now. Don't panic. We can definitely provide you with some support. So much nuance, but hopefully that gives you a flavour of what we're about. And back to SCVO colleagues to take it forwards.
Thank you. I think that was really fascinating. I'm sure there will be lots that people recognise there about the fears of closure, about the circumstances in the sector just now, but also about the opportunities that endings can present as well. what I'd like to do is just briefly hand you over to Rhonda, my colleague Rhonda, who will just let you know as well a bit about the support that SCVO offer, including our new resource. And then while Rhonda's chatting, you can of course listen intently, but also have a think about any questions that you might have, questions about the process or the support available, or just reflections about any of that that you recognise or that sparked something for you. So over to you, Rhonda.
Thanks, Rachel. Hi everyone, I'm Rhonda McLean. I run the SCVO Information Service, and what I wanted to do was just highlight the information that we've got on our website about closing down, if you get to that stage. So this is the SCVO homepage. If you go into our section on support and learning, and then I know this isn't sharing properly, sorry, I can't see the bit to make it bigger, sorry. I should have practiced. And then down on the right hand side, there's the section on closing down an organisation. We did this in partnership with the Decelerator, so it closely reflects the principles that they follow about, you know, making the decision, preparing. We've got some information about the legal processes there, and obviously, very importantly, as Iona mentioned, your organisation's legacy. I'm not going to go into every single page because you can have a look at this in your own time. But these are some of the sections within it about preparing for a closure, the actual legal process for the different kinds of organisations, and as I said, protecting your organisation's legacy. Feel free to have a look at that information on our website. If you want to get in touch with us for any more information or with any questions, that's our contact information there. If your organisation is a member of SCVO, there's a bit more support there through our legal advice service, tax and VAT service. We've got model policies and templates, and you can book a one-to-one session with myself and my colleague Tracy if you just want to have a chat with someone. That's all I wanted to say, so hopefully there's lots of questions.
Okay, thanks very much, Rhonda. We'll turn the recording off now so that you don't have to worry about that, so bear with me.